Good morning, everyone. There is a story about this boy. His name was Robbie. And Robbie came to a music teacher to learn how to do music lessons. But this kid wasn't quite very good at playing music, but he struggled along, and the teacher kept him in the group because he wanted to learn. And one day there was a recital, and Robbie shows up and he goes to the piano, and suddenly magic. He starts to perform like he never performed before. Most beautiful rendition he ever did. The teacher was so surprised and so shocked. She went over to him after and says, Robbie, you played phenomenally well today. What happened? How did you do it? And Robbie, with tears in his eyes, said, my mother's been very sick for a while, and just last week she passed away. And my mother was deaf. She never heard me play piano. Today was the first time she was able to hear me. And so I played with all of my gusto, with all of my power, with all of my strength, because I wanted her to hear for the first time in her life my music. This week's Torah portion is called Chaye Sarah, the life of Sarah. What's ironic is that in the opening verses, Sarah dies. Why is it called the life of Sarah? And so the first thing the Torah is intimating is, people talk about life after death. The real truth is there's no such thing as life after death. There's life after life, because the soul never dies. It lives on eternally. And the souls of our loved ones in heaven see and hear and are connected to us spiritually, although no longer physically. But perhaps there's a greater meaning to the name of the parsha, Chaye Sarah. Not just spiritual, but physical. And this week's parsha talks about the marriage of Isaac, Yitzchak to Rebekah. And the beautiful story how Eliezer goes to the well and finds Rebekah, and the girl who portrayed and demonstrated extreme kindness by offering water, not just for the servant Eliezer, but for all the camels. She's the one chosen for a bride. And so we learn about marriage, and the essential ingredient for successful marriage is kindness. You should look for a person with kindness. However, when Isaac marries Rebekah, it says he brought her into the tent, and he marries her, and he loves her, and he's comforted for the passing of his mother. And Rashi comments and says, what was the comfort? He saw that the miracles that occurred in his mother Sarah's home, which ceased after his mother Sarah died, resumed with the marriage to Rebekah. And what were these miracles? One of the miracles, Rashi says, was that when Sarah lit Shabbos candles, the candles burned from Friday night to Friday night, all week long, like the miracle of Hanukkah we're going to come up to. They burned 7 days instead of one night. When Sarah died, this miracle stopped. When Rebekah came into the tent and married Isaac, she lit her Shabbos candles, and once again there was a miracle. It burned for 7 days. So Isaac saw that Rebekah had the same spiritual quality and greatness of his mother, and that gave him comfort. He saw the continuity. What does it mean that the candles burnt all week? It means that the spirit of Shabbos, of holiness, that is in the home on a Friday night, didn't just end on Friday night or on Shabbat. It pervaded and permeated the entire week. The holiness of Shabbat was felt in the home from one Shabbat to the next Shabbat. And this is the meaning of Chaye Sarah. Sarah dies in this week's Torah portion. However, she lives on. You know where she lives on? When Jewish girls and Jewish women around the world light Shabbat candles every week, and they carry on the traditions of the matriarch Sarah 4,000 years ago. But tonight, when Jewish women light Shabbat candles, Sarah's alive. She lives through her descendants, who keep on bringing in Shabbat into Jewish homes, and that spirit of Shabbat is in the home, the holiness all week long, a Jewish home, Jewish families like she raised. That's the way we carry on the life of Sarah. And that's the way all of our lives have continuity. Through the values, through the traditions, through the teachings, through the Judaism that we teach our children and the next generations, that's the way our lives live on, not just in the next world, but in this world as well. I'll just tell you a true story. In the year 2000, the millennial year, the millennium, the New York Times ran a special millennium issue with 3 covers of the New York Times. The first cover was the edition of January 1st, 1900. They reran the millennium of the year 1900. Then they ran a second cover of the New York Times, which was that very day, January 1st, 2000, the turn of the century. And then they ran a third cover of the New York Times, which was a futuristic cover for the year January 1st, 2100. And the cover page, and this is factual, you could go check this out, describes stories that they imagined, that they envisioned would be on the cover of the New York Times in the year 2100, January 1st. And there was articles like, United States welcomes the 51st state, Cuba. And then there was an article about how robots are demanding equal rights to be able to vote in elections. And all these interesting made-up stories of what they could imagine would be on January 1st, 2100. And then on the cover of the New York Times Millennium issue of 2100, January 1st, 2100, it happens to be that January 1st, the year 2100 is a Friday. And so you know what they wrote on the cover of the New York Times? Candlelighting time in New York City, 18 minutes before sunset is at 4:39. Check your local listings for other areas. This was on the cover of the New York Times. And people were shocked. Why would the New York Times include that? And they called the editor of the New York Times, who was an Irish Catholic. And he said, I'll tell you the truth. Everything on the cover, we could only assume, we could only presume, we could only guess what might be on the cover in the year 2100. But one thing we know will be for sure in January 1st, Friday, January 1st, 2100. Jewish women around the world will be lighting Shabbat candles. That we know for sure will happen. And so it was the only real thing that we could say for certain will happen on that day. And so we included it on the cover of the New York Times. When you look at the name of this parsha, the life of Sarah, and you say, what do you mean Sarah died? Tonight when women light Shabbos candles, when girls light Shabbos candles, Sarah lives on through the light that she brings into this world, this Shabbat and every Shabbat.